to talk about something I've been calling the JoJo Siwa to Tradwife pipeline. Because a few years ago, JoJo Siwa was the glittery, rainbow bow, unapologetically queer teen icon.
Icon?
Well, she was an icon to some people. She came out. She wore rainbows everywhere. She was loudly, visibly, joyfully queer. And recently, there's been some vintage femme styling, a heterosexual public coupling, soft domestic imagery, a noticeable aesthetic shift.
She's looking much better.
No. Look, this video is not about attacking JoJo Siwa, we're asking a bigger question. Why does the jump from hyper-visible queer joy to nostalgic traditional femininity feel so culturally significant? Ugh. And why does the rise of tradwife content feel comforting to some queer people and deeply alarming to others? Who am I? The JoJo Siwa to Tradwife pipeline. What it means for queer and disabled people. Who am I? Well, hi. I'm Jessica Kellgren-Fozard. I'm a disabled vintage fashion wearing lesbian who makes videos about queer history, living with chronic illness and parenting as a queer couple with my wife Claudia. We have 3 children, and despite being the girlier one, if that's a thing, Claudia is the one who actually birthed them and is the primary caretaking parent. For the babies, at least. Our 4-year-old just kind of goes to whichever parent he feels at the time will be best able to answer his big questions about life, the universe, and everything. 42. The answer is always 42. Subscribe if you agree. Despite my vintage style, which we will come to in a moment, I am very much not a tradwife. I would not be very good at it, and I do not wish to be. I can think of doing nothing worse than labour in service of some man who gets to decide my reproductive rights.
Isn't that what you're doing when you pay taxes?
You are too smug in that apron. We'll come back to you in a moment, but for now, who is JoJo Siwa and why does she matter? To understand why this conversation feels charged, we need context. Like most controversial figures, JoJo Siwa became famous as a child, and her past is something that I personally would find traumatic. Her mother, Jesslyn, was obsessed with the idea that JoJo would be famous, and from an early age pushed her hard. She began dyeing her daughter's hair when she was just a toddler, with bleach, just bleaching it blonde, as one does, yeah. I mean, don't we all put chemicals on our tiny, teeny, precious babies' perfect heads? She would wake toddler JoJo up late into the evening to perform for guests who came to the house. This tiny child was meant to go through hours and hours of dance training and coaching a day, and she didn't send JoJo to school, preferring to focus on pushing her into the entertainment world. Not only is school, or just being around other children in general, great for opening your eyes to, wow, other people don't do that? Huh, maybe my family isn't normal. But it also allows a certain amount of self-expression and freedom to experiment, to figure out who you are. You get to try out terrible looks for a few months and then move on to the next one. You tell your friends to call you Beth for a few months, and then Lizzie, and then Eliza, and you're working out who you are.
Elizabeth is a perfectly good name as it is.
And it feels a little bit like those celebrities who didn't get the normal teen experience can sometimes have a bit of a delayed experimental period. We'll get back to that. After having been born in Nebraska in 2003, when JoJo was 9 years old, she finally, if you can say finally for a 9-year-old, got her big break. She'd been dancing in competitions from 18 months old, but was cast in Abby's Ultimate Dance Competition Season 2. If you've never heard of that show, it was a spin-off from Dance Moms. Dance Moms. Oh, I'm too British. Dance Moms. What's the American way to say mum? Mom. Mom. I really am going to need to be able to say this for a video about JoJo. Dance Moms. The show with all the memes and the mean lady. Also, where Sia poached the child she wanted to star in a pretty offensive film about autism from. The show is essentially about tiny girls doing very impressive dance moves whilst being emotionally and mentally beaten.
She's okay. No, she's not. No, she's not.
It's not great. Supposedly the drama was meant to be just about the mothers who sat and watched their children dancing and, their rivalry, but it obviously bled through and scarred those poor children, some of whom are now old enough to write books about the ordeal. When JoJo joined Dance Moms, it was an established franchise with the young dancers already well known. JoJo needed something to set her apart, so it was marketed as relentlessly upbeat, colourful and high energy. It appealed to a lot of children younger than her, but made adults and other children her age feel that they could just openly bully her.
It is hard to like happy people.
Oh, aren't you just a joy? Despite joining later in the show and only staying for a few seasons, JoJo went on to become the most famous of the personalities featured. She'd been building her own brand and persona alongside the show by starting a YouTube channel, collaborating with some in hindsight, very questionable, huge YouTubers, and also merchandising. Everything. I remember attempting to walk through WH Smith and just seeing JoJo branded everything. And I should openly admit here, I am completely the wrong demographic, but I actually have quite an affection for JoJo Siwa. Not for her songs, not for her looks, not even for her bows, and I'm a fan of bows, but because she was a smart little kid who made the best of the environment she was put in. She recently told a story on a podcast about how her mother would be upset, even off camera, when she was placed in the bottom of the pyramid on the show, the way it ranked the child dancers, because that's a totally normal thing to do. But JoJo, at the age of 11, would tell her mother that being placed in the bottom was a good thing, that the girl was not to win the week and be perfect. The girl was to have as much screen time as possible, and being in the bottom of the pyramid meant that would happen. That's a very astute 11-year-old, but she had already learnt from an early age that being over the top was what people wanted from her. To get attention and be rewarded, she must behave in a specific way, but at the same time, that attention is going to be often in the form of humiliation. So like the ultimate stage mother, Jessalyn's words were, "Nothing's off limit when it comes to doing things I think will benefit JoJo."
Wait, I'm feeling uneasy about that.
Me too. But JoJo's brand was built for children, and it was massive. Merchandise in every supermarket. You couldn't walk past a Claire's without her face 100 times staring back at you. A global tour before she was even an adult, sharing every waking moment of her life online. She probably also has videos of her sleeping, actually. Shane Dawson, Colleen Ballinger, James Charles and David Dobrik were just some of the fully grown adults she would make videos with. People who have all now had terrible scandals, largely for massively inappropriate things with minors, so. There have been long-running discussions online about how young YouTubers were embedded in adult creator ecosystems. Fame at that scale, that young, is complicated, and to be clear, JoJo is still incredibly young. She only turns 23 this year. She's also been happy to publicly defend her much older friends, with the ironic stance of, well, I know Colleen would never groom children because we have had a deep, intimate and very personal relationship since I was 12.
I don't think she thought that one through.
It's certainly interesting to note as well how JoJo is happy to speak positively not only about these YouTubers who behaved more than questionably towards her, but also about Abby Lee Miller, who headed the show Dance Moms and was diabolical to the children. Full-on screaming rage, which JoJo said in the Dance Moms reunion recently the girls should be grateful for. Why would she say these teenagers and young adults should be thankful for the childhood trauma they went through? Well, it's hard to see inside the bubble if you've never been given the chance to step outside of it. There are viral moments from the show of Abby yelling at JoJo, making her cry as a small child, berating her, and forcing the other children to tell her to her face what they dislike about her. So it's not that JoJo wasn't touched by the trauma, but she sees it as having prepared her for how hard her life would become in the entertainment industry, which apparently is a good thing. I don't know. Should we not instead be noting that Abby is part of the problem and perpetuating the issue that the industry should not be full of adults who exploit children? Alongside Dance Moms and YouTube, JoJo was making deals with Nickelodeon at high street shops. Her name became synonymous with rainbow and sparkle. She began releasing music. Slowly her branded high side ponytail came down. And then in 2021, JoJo came out as gay. I know, no one saw it coming. I don't know. I feel like when I found this out, it was an yes, of course moment. Like, yes, of course she is not straight. That makes perfect sense to me. She didn't soft launch it. She wore a shirt that said, "Best gay cousin ever." She posed with her girlfriend. She became, for many young queer kids, a bright, safe rainbow beacon who had a string of really messy and overlapping relationships that all seemed to involve a cruise and Disneyland. She even at one point had a little crash out as her relationships all fell apart, and her mother recorded it and posted it on the internet because Jessalyn will do anything for the views. We have learnt this. Teenage JoJo became suddenly all about her gayness. Don't we all do that when we first come out? Her aesthetic leaned even more into overt rainbow symbolism. Pride, glitter, camp. That girl loves glitter. As we saw on Selling Sunset, when Chriselle had to literally rip the rhinestones off JoJo's house, JoJo with her dance partner Jenna Johnson even became the first same-sex pair on Dancing with the Stars and ended up getting second place. So this sexuality reveal wasn't just a quiet side thing a la Chloe Grace Moretz. JoJo was putting her sexuality front and centre in her branding.
Because it's all a brand? She should try getting offline and baking some cake.
I won't say that isn't a good idea, but it's unhelpful right now. In 2022, she cut her hair short, and whilst it looked like she was throwing herself headfirst into the queer world and proclaimed herself the first queer pop star ever, many others would like a word, there was also something else going on. For a while, she seemed to be clickbaiting with pregnancy rumours on Snapchat, which then turned out to be false. She declared she'd chosen a sperm donor and her children were incoming. And someone from JoJo's reality show, Siwa's Dance Pop Revolution, leaked that the gay era might not be as real as it seemed. They claimed that her mother Jessalyn had planned a bad girl era for her to move away from child-focused content and instead allow her to grow with the audience. The bad girl behaviour in question being gay.
It's what the Lord wouldn't want.
I don't think kiss-style rainbow sequined JoJo Siwa was taken into consideration when the Bible was written, personally. The intent was that JoJo could then move on, as other teen stars have done before her, think Miley Cyrus, apologise for her bad behaviour, which in this case was apparently being openly gay and messy with it, and then...
And then what?
Well, indeed. What? JoJo joined the Celebrity Big Brother UK house for its 24th season in 2025. It was a dramatic 20 days that saw her face homophobic comments from Mickey Rourke, which she publicly challenged, and then develop an intense bond with fellow contestant Chris Hughes, who she now describes as her soulmate. In July of that year, JoJo released a cover of the 1980s hit Betty Davis' Eyes. In the teaser, she wore old Hollywood glam, a vintage curled blonde bob, frilled outfit, and bold red lipstick, whilst singing about the man she loves. She dates one man and becomes a 1950s housewife, complained one viewer.
So she isn't gay?
Well, that isn't for anyone to say except JoJo. She can choose how she identifies.
But she's dating a man now.
Right, but sexuality is defined by you, not by the people you date. You can know you're a lesbian before you've ever had your first kiss. You can know you're a lesbian but you were married to a man for 40 years. And you could also be JoJo Siwa, who said that she was pansexual the whole time and maybe accidentally leaned into the word gay a bit too much. You can go in and out and in and out of the closet. It isn't simple.
Being a traditional wife, mother and homemaker is.
Good for you. Again, people are allowed to evolve. Sexuality can be fluid. Aesthetic shifts are normal, but culturally, the visual journey from hyper-visible queer icon to vintage domestic femininity sits right alongside the broader rise of tradwife content.
She can be happy now.
Yeah, get over yourself. She's publicly called it a Halloween costume and says she still identifies as queer and pansexual. Sure, the very rainbow, very gay aesthetic also had touches of Halloween costume about it. What I've just come out outfit doesn't, but your whole thing is pretty problematic in itself.
Oh, please tell me more.
Section 2. What is the tradwife aesthetic? Have you noticed how suddenly everyone on the internet's churning butter?
This isn't butter.
Big skirts, soft lighting, perfect pies cooling on the windowsill, and captions like embracing my feminine calling. Tradwife, short for traditional wife, of course, is absolutely everywhere right now. And as someone who does genuinely look like I'm going to a tea party every hour of the day, even when I'm making breakfast, it should speak to me, but it doesn't. Aesthetically, sure, I maybe like some of the dresses. The vibe makes me want to vomit. Side question, why do these American tradwives make a thing about how they use ingredients? What are the rest of you doing? How are you making sustenance without ingredients? I'm intrigued.
Well, I use eggs for my scrambled eggs.
Rather than frog's legs? Some aspects of this seem particularly American. I grew up with the, ooh, America has all the fancy technology and most processed foods, and now suddenly it's, we're going back to basics, when that's just what we've been doing all along, just basic old Europe over here. I remember the first time I saw pancake mix. I was gobsmacked.
I'm sorry, how much money? And you still have to add eggs and milk?
Which is not to say that I think the old way of doing things is the best. It's just that whenever a trend romanticizes a very specific version of womanhood, I have questions. Because when we say traditional for whom? Traditional according to which bodies? And who gets quietly edited out of the picture? Tradwife content is a social media genre centered around women embracing what are framed as traditional gender roles and femininity, homemaking, submission to a husband, domesticity, modesty, often heterosexual marriage with children. It often references and romanticizes the 1950s or pre-second wave feminism eras. But who decided that is femininity. On TikTok and Instagram, femininity can show up as elaborate home-cooked meals, handcrafting vintage-inspired decor, content about submitting to your husband, rejection of modern feminism, second celebration of domestic dependence, third yes, some creators position it as purely aesthetic. My own love for vintage clothes is purely aesthetic. I am not a purist. I will happily mix up my decades, and I recognise I would have a pretty rubbish life if I lived in the past, both for the gay thing, but also for the disabled thing. Others frame being a tradwife explicitly as a moral or political stance.
Oof, how awkward.
And importantly, it is extremely algorithm friendly, with millions of views racking up for the tradwife hashtag. Highly stylized domestic imagery performs well. Soft visuals of routine content, aspirational lifestyles. These are social media gold. I do appreciate how many of the accounts I follow that have recently had to post, no, this is just a look. Please don't assume my politics. That's not what I do. But this isn't just sourdough and gingham. It is part of a broader cultural nostalgia wave, one that academics have been analysing for years. Nostalgia is powerful. Cultural theorists like Angela McRobbie have written about how post-feminist culture repackages older gender roles as empowering choices. And Sarah Ahmed talks about how emotions circulate socially, how certain images generate feelings of comfort and belonging. As a child, my happy place was my grandparents' house. Being with them made me feel good, and I still do feel great comfort in anything related to them. They were born in the early 1910s, and yes, they were already pretty old when I was born, so my cultural references for soothing imagery ended up decades earlier than my friends. Why is Jessica comforted by petticoats? To be unpacked in a later video. The point is that yes, a romanticised past can be incredibly alluring, especially in chaotic political and economic times. An orderly home, clear roles, defined structure, clarity feels safe. And safety is appealing, even to people who exist outside the traditional framework, including queer people. Why some queer people connect to it. As we have discussed many times on this channel, femininity and masculinity are not as easily defined as the world wants you to believe. Expressions of gender are also not tied to your sexuality. Although you're watching this video, so I feel like you already know something about this. Yet, not every queer person rejects conservative society's idealised version of gender. Not every queer couple wants to dismantle domestic partnership roles. Being gay, being trans, being queer doesn't necessarily mean you dislike the status quo. Some queer people long for the sense of tradition they were excluded from, or the clear partnership roles they saw growing up.
Makes sense to me.
Marriage wasn't always legal, domesticity wasn't always accessible, respectability was denied. I found a couple on Instagram recently, who I am not going to name because I'm not speaking particularly highly about them, who, despite being a same-sex male couple, had all of the hallmarks of those Utah family Instagrams with 10 children. Bible passage in the bio, long row of identically dressed children, cheesy videos about who named each child or who does which house jobs, and they so clearly had delineated themselves into the husband and the wife that I thought it was a parody account. Viewer, it was not. I was shaken. A different shaken from the fury I feel when my wife and I asked, which one of you is the husband? I'll explode you with my eyes. Because sure, when you grow up queer, you're often positioned as outside normal life, and it must for some feel comforting to get back inside the in-group, however that looks, even if you aren't outright subverting it. Personally, the majority of vintage dressing people I know are queer. I admittedly may have a sample bias here, but for many of us, and I am including myself, embracing vintage femininity or masculine aesthetics can feel like reclaiming something. It can feel like, I deserve the fairy tale too, and that desire is human.
It's very human.
But here's where it gets complicated, because reclaiming domesticity is not the same thing as endorsing restricted gender ideology. The line between aesthetic appreciation and political alignment is thin online. Cultural theorist Angela McRobbie writes about post-feminist nostalgia, the way media revives old gender roles whilst framing them as empowering choices. The key idea: when inequality is rebranded as aesthetic preference, it becomes harder to critique.
Wait, I'm in this picture and I don't like it.
Nostalgia is selective. The 1950s were simple. If you were white, if you were straight, if you were not visibly disabled, if you had access to economic stability. Even those grandparents I idolised, who were adults in the 1950s, they were white people who could speak English, and my mother still has stories about their struggles to fit in because they weren't British enough. The immigrant experience, how she echoes down the decades. The 1950s were not exactly a paradise, and for many queer and disabled people that simpler time was not safe. So when we romanticize an era, we need to ask, whose safety are we remembering? Do we want to be there? Or do we want to represent ourselves? Why others see red flags. Now, here's where I want to be careful. Obviously, there is nothing inherently wrong with liking homemaking, wearing vintage clothing, enjoying domestic life, being a stay-at-home parent. The problem is not baking.
Well, I should hope not. You certainly eat enough of what I make.
Fair. The issue is framing one model of womanhood as natural, superior, or morally correct. Disability scholar Leonard J. Davis, in Enforcing Normality, talks about how modern societies construct a norm and then measure everyone against it. Tradwife content often subtly reinstates a very specific norm. Able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, financially supported by a husband, reproductively oriented. When that becomes the aspirational template, everyone outside it becomes deviant, and deviation always carries a social cost. Now, personally, I might dress like this, but I've always connected more with Cher's responding to her mother's, "How will you find a rich man?" with,
I said, "Mom, I am a rich man."
"Would that we all had the confidence of a cis-het, white, upper middle class man with good prospects," or Cher, especially online. But thanks to Tradwives, I have started to become wary now about what this look means. What are my victory rolls saying to other people? Oh no. I hate that the way I express my gender has become synonymous online with conservatism, anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric, reproductive control, and economic dependency.
Spoiler for those people, not everybody in the past was conservative.
But yes, there were fewer disabled and chronically ill people because we are actually able to live now. Disabled people especially, the aesthetic of tireless domestic productivity can feel punishing. Chronic illness doesn't look right in a perfectly curated sourdough montage. I did a bit, then I had to go lie down, and I did a bit more, and then I just had enough. I went to sleep. So, when queer public figures shift visually towards that aesthetic, some viewers feel unease. Not because femininity is wrong, but because historically that aesthetic was used to erase them, even if some of us have reclaimed it now. Vintage queers. Queer communities have long reclaimed the vintage aesthetic, but often as camp, resistance, or reimagining. Two women in a 1950s kitchen together canoodling. A non-binary person in a perfectly tailored 1940s suit. A disabled queer couple building family on their own terms. That's not submission to tradition, that's transformation, and the difference is agency. Tradwife rhetoric sometimes implies,
"This is just the natural order. It's how women were meant to live."
Queer existence, by definition, disrupts the idea that there is one natural order. So when Tradwife content gains cultural dominance, queer people may feel
erased, socially judged, positioned as undesirable.
Even when it's not explicitly stated.
I thought I just said it.
Cultural messaging doesn't have to shout to be powerful.
Sometimes it whispers.
And the pipeline effect doesn't mean that every openly queer person is about to become a tradwife, but that online culture increasingly offers a very specific path. Hypervisible queer identity, algorithm backlash and cultural fatigue, rebranding into softer, nostalgic femininity, mainstream approval. When you are a public queer figure, especially one who grew up online, that pressure is immense. This isn't about one individual's motives, it's about incentives. The algorithm rewards heterosexual coupling narratives, domestic content, nostalgia, and clear gender roles. And it punishes complexity. So the pipeline isn't necessarily ideological. Sometimes it's economic. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's about safety. And that's worth interrogating. Also, why we're still using comes out as non-straight as synonymous for in her bad girl era. Disability, performance, and perfection. I don't feel like I've touched on this nearly enough, but as a disabled person, I just don't have the time and the ability to be a tradwife, even if I wanted. God, who is making their own bread? Oh, it's one of the dads at the school gates who keeps telling me how easy it is to make my own bread. Absolutely not. Also, So that's why he has the time to bake the stupid bread. In Ballerina Farm's shocking expose interview, it states that she sometimes is so exhausted looking after her 8 children that she collapses and has to stay in bed for weeks. I have 3 children, and I'm running on a lot of caffeine and medication already. Disabled people often feel pressure to perform normalcy, to prove that we are productive, attractive, capable. When domestic labour is aestheticised and monetised, it can create pressure. Tradwife content intensifies performance culture. If you're home, you should be producing beauty, immaculate homes, endless cooking, high energy caregiving, but real bodies rest. Real bodies fluctuate. Real homes are messy. My home is messy. If domesticity becomes aestheticised labour, monetised and filtered, it risks reinforcing the idea that worth equals productivity. That's exhausting. Tradwife culture can unintentionally / really intentionally reinforce this dynamic, because it doesn't just present homemaking as it really is for the majority of us. It presents idealised, relentless perfection. Who is funding this as well? How do you have the money? How do you have the money and the time? I doubt all of your batches of bread are good. Are you just wasting money on ingredients? Who is working? Okay, your husband is working, obviously, because you're living on your husband. But like, what does he do? Are they all in finance? Why are all of the husbands in finance? That's not a traditional job. Why is that allowed in the Tradwife life? What is it? He's a venture capitalist. A job they had hundreds of years ago. But back to bodies. Bodies that cannot sustain the rhythm of constant work are made invisible. Disability studies scholars often critique the supercrip trope, the idea that disabled people must overperform productivity to be worthy, and I absolutely fall into this trap. There is no way I cannot put all of my available resources into whatever I am doing, or else I morally feel that I have failed. I must look perfect when I leave the house. My wife doesn't mind the children looking messy, but I cannot stand it, because if I do not have the energy to keep them clean and tidy, then that must make true everything that was said to me about not having children, because I wouldn't be able to cope.
Oh, you're not really going to pick up both of those babies, are you?
Well, yes, they're twins, so I kind of have to. Who benefits? Let's follow the money, that venture capitalist money. Despite claiming to be the little woman at home who lives off her husband, many Tradwife influencers monetize through affiliate kitchenware, modest fashion brands, marriage coaching, religious lifestyle courses.
I've added a bow to it, so now you have to buy a new one to complete the collection.
Which is fine. Influencing is work. It's how I make my money. I mean, it's not really... I guess I'm more of a content creator. Oh my gosh. Not the time to have an identity crisis. But when submission and dependency are commodified, we have to ask, is this personal empowerment and your actual life, or is this branding? Are you living this, or are you selling this? And if financial independence is discouraged rhetorically, while influencers themselves earn independently, are they just keeping their audience down? Are we attempting to keep working class women at home unable to work because childcare is so expensive, but hey, at least they can make bread, whilst upper class women quietly make money that they pay to the nanny who hovers in the background? What is the end goal here?
Oh, I think you learnt that one in history class.
This isn't about attacking individuals, and definitely not JoJo Siwa, who knows how to attract attention, but judging by the rest of her daily outfits, to this day is not shaking off her natural tomboy essence anytime soon. No straight girl vibes happening there. It's about recognising that cultural movements often intersect with political ideologies, especially around reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and disability support systems. Online trends don't exist in isolation from real-world policy. In conclusion, vintage fashion is not inherently conservative. Domesticity is not inherently oppressive. Cooking for your family is not inherently anti-feminist. Telling someone else to do it when they don't want to is an issue, though.
We can love aprons, we can love homemaking, we can love tradition.
But tradition must expand, not contract. A trend becomes dangerous when it narrows who is allowed to belong, and beautiful when it widens the door. JoJo Siwa's journey isn't a morality tale, other than you shouldn't put your small child into the entertainment industry, but she can be a cultural mirror. Some people look at vintage femininity and see softness, stability, romance. Others see historical exclusion, control, and erasure. Both reactions make sense, and you are allowed to reclaim that femininity if either of those things spark in you. But the future I'm interested in is one where queer kids can wear rainbows or aprons or tailored suits or glitter bows without being nudged towards a single acceptable shape. And you don't have to change your whole look just because you've fallen in love with someone else. Share a creator in the comments who makes vintage content in an inclusive way. And if your feed is also full of, oh no, this is just my style, I promise I'm not conservative videos, then let me know. Let's share our algorithmic similarities. A special thank you to the members of the wonderful Kellgren-Fozard Club for all of your support. Clubbies are sponsors of this video. You can join the Kellgren-Fozard Club right here on my channel by clicking the join button next to subscribe. And clubbies, which is what we call members, get a whole bunch of cool perks like access to exclusive videos every month, plus clubbies comments right at the top of the comment section, which helps keep it a much nicer place for everyone.
Subscribe so you don't miss out on more fashion psychoanalysis and takedowns of lesbian icons.
Subscribe for more intersectional cultural breakdowns, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.